Good morning, everyone. For the record, my name is Ruti Lujan. I am the chair of the Boston City Council Committee on Civil Rights and Immigrant Advancement. I am joined today by my colleagues, City Council President Ed Flynn, and by the sponsor, Councilor Lara. This hearing is being recorded and is being live streamed at boston.gov/city-council-tv and broadcast on Xfinity Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, FiOS Channel 964. We will also take public testimony at the end of the hearing. If you are interested in testifying, please email ron.cobb@boston.gov. That's ron.cobb@boston.gov for the link. If providing virtual testimony, please make sure your username is your first and last name. There's also a sign-up sheet for anyone who is here and present and would like to give testimony. Please state your name and affiliation, residence, and limit your comments to a few minutes to ensure that all comments and concerns can be heard. Today's hearing is on docket number 032, Order 4, hearing to discuss restoring municipal voting rights to immigrants with legal status. We're joined by the administration. The administrative panel is Monique Nguyen, Executive Director of the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Advancement, and uses she, her pronouns. Sabino Piemonte, Head Assistant Registrar, Elections Department, and Elijah Miller, Economic Opportunity Inclusion, and the Director of Policy at the Office of Economic Opportunity and Inclusion. That will be followed by a community panel featuring Professor Alex Kazar, the Matthew W. Sterling Jr. Professor of History and Social Policy at Harvard University, who will be joining us by Zoom, Jacob Love, lawyer from Lawyers for Civil Rights, staff attorney, and Shanique Spalding from the Massachusetts Voter Table. I am thankful for the administration for being here and for those who are going to be testifying. Thankful for Councilor Lara for sponsoring this hearing. Non-citizen voting, it's an order for a hearing to discuss restoring municipal voting rights to immigrants with legal status. You know, we are here because regardless of immigrant status, we all share the same interest in having good schools, affordable housing, effective transportation, and economic justice. Allowing a permanent class of non-voters to persist on the margins only benefits people and people and corporations who would benefit, who would profit from those who are undocumented. Far from diluting the concept of citizenship, non-citizen voting would enrich it by fully incorporating immigrants. So I'm excited to have this discussion today about restoring municipal voting rights to immigrants. There are 15 municipalities across the country that allow non-citizens to vote in local elections as of January of this year. 11 were located in Maryland, 2 were located in Vermont, 1 was in New York City, and other was in San Francisco. Illinois and DC are also in the process of exploring granting non-citizen voting rights, something that was also part of the founding of this country. Non-citizens with legal status live here, they go participate in our schools, pay taxes, are members of this body politic, and should be able to exercise their right to vote on the matters that matter most to them, and be part of fully the democratic process here. We know that the citizenship process is a laborious one, and so a laborious and expensive one that creates many barriers for our residents. And so enfranchising them will help to show who we really are as a city, which is a city that really welcomes and incorporates our immigrants into the social fabric of our city. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to the sponsor, Councilor Lara, for any opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to my colleagues, our panelists who are here with us today, and our neighbors who have joined us this morning, either here in the chambers or on Zoom, to have this really important conversation. When I delivered my maiden speech, I set forth a vision for a truly participatory and representative democracy. And this vision is a vision that was passed down to us by leaders like Ida B. Wells, Ella Baker, Fannie Lou Hamer, Dr. Martin Luther King, Robert Moses, and Abram Ramirez. It has one simple aim: to ensure that we the people means all of the people. In a time where states and cities all across the country are systemically disenfranchising voters and the Voting Rights Act remains at risk, we have a responsibility here in the City Council and in the City of Boston to expand access to the ballot and to reaffirm our commitment to a strong representative democracy. As it stands, anywhere from 68,000 to 100,000 immigrants with legal status live in the City of Boston. This includes, but isn't limited to, people who have lawful permanent residence, people who are visa holders, TPS and DACA recipients. These people are our neighbors. They raise their children here, attend our schools, clean our streets, serve our food. They're entrepreneurs, CEOs. They run our nonprofit organizations and direct their resources to the city in the form of taxes, yes, but more importantly, in their investment in the future of the city of Boston. My father is one of those people. He has spent over 30 years in this country working, paying taxes, sending us to school, putting us through college, and watching us pour all of our gifts back into our communities. But last year, when I, his youngest daughter, ran for public office, he couldn't cast his vote. And our story is not a unique one. All across the city and right here in this chamber, we have people who, in spite of not being given voice in their local government, they've worked and they've sacrificed and invested in their neighborhoods. Now, I'm one of those people that believes that everyone should have a say in the decisions that impact their daily lives. But if someone here or someone who is watching us on Zoom are one of the folks that believe that voting is a privilege, then I'm here to tell you all that our neighbors have more than earned that privilege. The ballot has power. And although it seemingly stands as a single note, it does have the ability to join in a symphony and change the tune of our city to one that we can all sing along to, regardless of our immigration status. My hope is for today that we can have a conversation that moves us one step closer to this collective song. So I thank you all again for being here, and I'm excited to continue this conversation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Council Lara. Council President Flynn.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the sponsors as well. Thank you to the panelists for being here. I'm here to learn more about this proposal and looking forward to the public testimony as well. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, President Flynn. I will now pass it over to the administration for your opening remarks. Whoever wants to go first, Sabino, if you would like to.
Sure. Good morning. My name is Sabino Piamonti. I'm the head assistant registrar for the city of Boston, and I'm happy that you invited us to this conversation, and we're here to help and support to implement any changes to voting. So we're here to listen to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabina, and thank you for all that you do to make sure that voting is a smooth process here. You are an asset to the city, so thank you for being here. Monique, and sorry, I should use your official titles, Executive Director Nguyen, but you now have the floor.
No, it's fine.
Yes.
And I love my name, Monique. Good morning. Thank you, Councilor Lara, for sponsoring the hearing, and Committee Chair, Councilor Lujan, and other councilors for the opportunity to speak to you today. Immigrants are a vital part of Boston, and Mayor Wu and our administration are committed to making sure they are part of democracy and have equitable access to what Boston has to offer. Immigrants make up almost 1/3 of our city's population. They are business owners, workers, and taxpayers. They are our parents, neighbors, and our friends. And as contributing members of our society, they should have a say in what happens in our communities. There are a lot of ways to do that, including civic engagement, voting, and becoming a naturalized citizen. But we recognize that many people face barriers to naturalization. That's why the Mayor's Office for Immigrant Advancement and Project Citizenship partner to host Citizenship Day every year. It is the largest citizenship workshop in New England. We serve about 300 people annually. This upcoming year, this will be our 9th year, and we're hoping to increase this number in 2023 and beyond. Volunteer lawyers help fill out citizenship applications for free, a service that usually costs thousands. We also help those who are eligible for the low waiver fee, and that reduces the cost in half. The full application fee is $725. By eliminating the barriers of legal access and costs, we've served more than 2,600 people to date, but there are other barriers to naturalization. For immigrants who are lawful permanent residents, known as LPRs, they're green card holders who have been here for decades. Many tell us they're afraid to naturalize because they don't think they can pass the English test. Others are from countries that don't allow dual citizenship, so getting a U.S. citizenship would make it difficult to visit or take care of their families in other countries. Others are frustrated by the cost of the application fee and attorney fees, and how long the process takes, which ranges from 8 months to over 2 years, at best for LPRs. I also took a long time to naturalize. I was a green card holder for almost 8 years because of the same fears and barriers and the costs. And ever since I did naturalize, the first thing I did was I was excited to get out and vote. And as part of that process, I also got really into door knocking. And I always meet the same profile of a person every year while I'm doing door knocking and canvassing for candidates. is that I always meet someone that works at a store or on the street that stops me and just is like, who are you like canvassing for? They're wanting to sit down and have a talk about who would they vote for and the issues that matter to them. And whenever I get to the stage, it was like, okay, what's your game plan to getting for voting day? They're actually, I can't vote. I'm a green card holder. And I meet these people every single year. And they tell me that they just can't afford it, or they're scared, or just can't get to that stage. So those barriers are something that I hold in my heart whenever I do this work every single day through our office. Naturalization isn't an option for those who have temporary protective status either, or TPS. People who have lived in Boston for 10 or even 20 years and have raised their children here, but have no pathway to permanent status. According to the BPDA analysis of the latest data, more than 92,000 people are non-citizen adults of voting age. From that number, 43% are legal permanent residents. And the rest are student and H-1B visa holders and other statuses or no status. To break down the numbers of non-citizens even more, in East Boston, 34% of this community are non-citizens. And throughout Boston, 34% of adult Hispanics and 40% adult Asians are non-citizens. Our administration and my office are committed to serving people regardless of their status, who help immigrants get involved, feel empowered, and become equal contributors to our society. That's one of the reasons we have Immigrants Lead Boston, now in its third year, and our current class is graduating this Friday. They represent 8 Boston neighborhoods, come from 17 countries, and speak 14 languages. They'll join our alumni network of 60 people and growing. Immigrants Lead Boston is a program that recruits emerging immigrant leaders to advance their skills to advocate for their communities. We've seen our graduates go on to do great things, advocating and empowering our communities. Just last week, an Immigrant Leads Boston alum sat in this room and gave testimony to you, counselors, and about the importance of supporting migrants in Massachusetts. Through this program, I've seen firsthand how people want to be more involved, but don't always have the pathways or resources to do so. That's why it's our job to embed equity, inclusion in our work, and our administration and Moya will always stand in making sure everyone has a seat at a table by creating opportunities to increase civic participation every day, so that Boston is truly a city for all. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you, Director Nguyen, and thank you for sharing those stories about door knocking. As a Haitian American and canvassing a lot in my communities, those stories, we hear them time and time again. And so just giving credence to why enfranchising our immigrants with legal status is important, and thanks for all the work that Moya is doing on behalf of our immigrant and migrant communities. Next up, we have Elijah Miller from the Office of Economic Opportunity and Inclusion, Director of Policy. Director Miller, you now have the floor.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Elijah Miller. I'm the Director of Policy in the Mayor's Office of Economic Opportunity and Inclusion. I'd like to thank Councilor Lara for sponsoring this hearing and the other councilors and participants in attendance for bringing attention to the issue of municipal voting rights for legal immigrants. The ability for people to participate in politics and economic exchange are intimately intertwined. History shows us that who gets financing to scale their business, who gets a loan to start their business, who's able to live in a neighborhood with expanding economic opportunities, who gets a quality education that inspires them to innovate, who gets a fair wage for their work, and who gets the opportunity to be compensated for their work at all, are all influenced by the political and legal system. In fact, shining a light on the link between political freedom and economic freedom was among the great revelations of the Enlightenment era. To have no formal voice in the political process of the place where you live, work, dream, and suffer is to be a subject in servitude. If we care to preserve democracy on this earth, we would be wise to remember the heart of citizenship in Western civilization beats with the strength of people bearing their inalienable rights. That is why our nation's Constitution does not begin with we, the citizens of the United States, but we, the people of the United States. For if you should choose to pursue your life, liberty, and happiness in and for the strength of this nation, then it was understood that you should be her citizen. Though we have yet to fulfill the ideals of the Constitution and we will not be resolving federal problems with what we're hoping to do here locally, the Office of Economic Opportunity and Inclusion understands the incredible facts about how much immigrants contribute to our communities and our economy. Immigrants pay billions of dollars every year in taxes to help ensure we have the best public schools in the world, and immigrants fill roughly a fifth of all local jobs in educational services. Immigrants spend billions of dollars every year at our businesses, and immigrants fill roughly a quarter of all local jobs in retail trade. Moreover, immigrants account for nearly 40% of our employees in the arts, entertainment, recreation, accommodation, and food services industries. Immigrants take care of our sick and wounded parents and grandparents by accounting for a third of all Bostonians employed as healthcare practitioners and supporting staff. Immigrants are building the future of our city by working in a third of all our computer, engineering, and science-oriented occupations, and are literally building our city by filling almost 40% of all our construction jobs. Considering almost 1 out of every 3 Bostonians is foreign-born, it should be no surprise that immigrants contribute to every facet of our economy, often cheerfully working alongside every one of us, sometimes never revealing the torment of the exclusion they may be experiencing. Immigrants are so much more than an important part of our growing economy. They're our friends, our neighbors, our family, our people, and we should offer them the inclusion they so rightly deserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Miller, for that strong statement and support, and for recognizing that immigrants are just such a vital part of the economic fabric of this city and of this country, really. The way that we deal with labor shortages traditionally is through immigration. Even when immigrants face xenophobia and racism and exclusion, and so having a city and being a city that recognizes the vitality of immigrants and their contribution is really important. So we are really happy to see such strong support. I'm now going to turn it over to the sponsor for any questions she may have for the administration.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all of you for being here with us today and for your opening statements and for all the work that you do for the City of Boston, honestly, to really support our immigrant communities. One of the arguments that we often hear from folks, and this is for Executive Director Wen, is that voting, if people want to vote and they want to have a voice, then that they should become citizens. And I think in your opening statements, you really outlined the barriers to becoming a citizen. So can you talk a little bit more about that? Because it's not as easy as if you want to vote, you should become a citizen. And while you are, that people who are ultimately have legal status are trying to move in that direction or maybe may not. Can you just share a little bit more about some of those barriers and
Definitely. Yeah, there's so many layers to that. There's the basic fear alone of even applying, and also the process of passing citizenship test, and also the English. A lot of folks are, even though they are functionally able to speak English and to work and enjoy society, but the idea is very daunting to get to a stage that you might get rejected. So fear of even losing some sort of grounding in that. And also the cost of naturalization is $725, just the fee itself, but that doesn't include the legal fees of getting an attorney, because you are fearful of even doing that alone and then getting rejected alone. So getting an attorney and finding one that you can trust is also another barrier that can cost thousands of dollars if it wasn't for events like Project Citizenship Day. Yes, and those are the main barriers. And then the processing time takes about 8 months at best, but that's just for an easy case for over two years sometimes. So it's just a long journey just for a green card holder to apply and get it.
And that is specifically for a green card holder. Is there different waiting times for people who have different legal statuses?
Yes, because then you'll have to reach the stage of like adjust. If you have a visa, a visa that's eligible for pathway citizenship, you just have to finish that process. And there's, depending on what type of visa it is, then it has its own wait times and its own procedures. So, it's contingent on what type of visa or type of temporary status that you may have.
And you said a visa that has a pathway to citizenship. There are visas that do not have pathways to citizenships, that people can live here and for extended periods of time and hold those visas that don't have pathways.
Yes, it just stays like you're not eligible. So there's visa that you don't have a pathway there. So there's even a lot of business visas that are just designed for you to stay in that perpetual stage indefinitely. But you can run and operate a business but never be eligible for citizenship or vote. Yeah. Yeah, but then you can be an employer for decades, even your whole life, and never be able to vote.
Okay, thank you. And so from what you've shared with us, Executive Director, it seems like people with legal status and immigrants and people who are undocumented are already incredibly civically involved in their neighborhood and in their city. But if we were to pass this and we would get it through the State House, if we go by home rule petition, I'm not really sure what the next step is going to be. But if this were to move forward, how would what would you anticipate your office? How would you anticipate this work in terms of getting people registered to vote, resources, and how would that look like for you?
Yes, we would likely expand the existing framework that we have to incorporate more people. So the project citizenship, we would probably expand that and probably do a lot more workshops for people to understand ways that they can adjust their status, and then also for them to also learn how to even engage in the voting process and do civic leadership workshops. Yeah, so we would expand it in those type of ways.
Thank you so much. And I have Sabino. Hi. It's good to see you. We've just passed a home rule petition for 16 to 17-year-olds here in the city of Boston. And we were having conversations around what the implementation of that would look like. I anticipate that the implementation of that for you might look similar, although it might be on a much larger scale. And so do you, if we were to enfranchise immigrant voters with legal status here in the city of Boston, how do you anticipate that impacting our municipal elections?
Probably be the same impact as 16 and 17-year-olds, depending on the amount of folks that will take advantage of the opportunities. We will just have to implement new ways of keeping those voting lists intact, as well as notifying those voters of what types of elections they can vote in. I'm anticipating that this home rule petition will be just for municipal elections, so they will have to be notified for non-participating in federal or state elections.
Yeah, and we've kind of had this conversation with the 16 and 17-year-olds where we've solved for having separate ballots, where the federal, the federal races are not on there, or you're only seeing the municipal races in the ballot, and so on and so forth. And so there might be some overlap to implementation where we can kind of implement it in that way as well. Do you know right now what percentage of eligible voters in the city of Boston are registered?
As of the last election we just had on November 8th, there was roughly 445,000 registered voters. I don't know the actual percentage that incorporates, because we do a city census every year. Our city census only incorporates 17 years of age or older.
Yeah.
But based upon the federal census, I believe there's 630,000 residents in the city, but I don't have it. Probably 2/3 are registered.
So probably 2/3. So more so, I'm thinking in the sense that even if we have 68,000 people with legal status, that everybody might not register to vote or take, like you said, take advantage of it. And so I'm thinking numerically about the influx of voters that we would have to add to the roll. And Madam Chair, if I may ask one last question to...
You have more time because not a lot of councilors.
Thank you, perfect. To Director Miller, one of the things that we've heard from you and in your opening remarks is that not only are immigrants with legal status or immigrants in this country and in this city civically involved, they're also economically involved. So do you have any idea of what the economic implications would be of enfranchising people with legal status in terms of how they can participate in the local economy, or if they would have access to different resources from the city and from your office if they were to become eligible to vote?
That's a great question. The impact of enfranchisement on the economic prospects would likely be indirect over a period of time. So them getting the right to vote is not going to instantly change their economic footing, but it may, what is a large barrier both in the civic and economic arena is fear. Fear to participate, fear to try to reach higher economic strata, fear over competitive employees that use your status against you. And so this kind of enfranchisement gives people perhaps the courage to do more and to get more of what they deserve. As far as access to certain city services, it would likely be a similar scenario. So there's no, your ability to vote doesn't impact whether you could get low-income, heating assistance. It's about your status, and to that, I would say it's nuanced. So, for instance, DACA recipients or TPS recipients or legal permanent residents all might qualify for different services. I could say in our office, a lot of the programs that we have released and that we are planning to release are available to everybody, and we hope that, immigrant entrepreneurs and immigrant small business owners take advantage of our programs, because they are for everybody, regardless of citizenship status. And I would also encourage immigrants to have the bravery to speak with, great people like Director Wynn and others in the city. There are programs between energy assistance. It's getting cold, it's winter, it's snowing. There are low-income heating assistance programs that people are eligible for even if they're not citizens. There are food programs that some, and I don't particularly like the term, but qualified aliens is how the federal government will define it. Some of them can get food stamps. And so this is it's very particular, but I really encourage people to, reach out. I'm coordinating with people across the city to make sure that they have intentional strategies about communicating the fact that these resources are meant to be used, and often citizenship status, it sometimes is a straight up barrier, and sometimes it's more about the fear, the stigma that pushes people away from applying.
And so we would be seeing indirect longer-term benefits that come with being further engaged, listened to, given voice in your community, that would increase participation, more requests for support, participation economically and civically in the city as well. Thank you, Madam Chair. No further questions.
Thank you. President Flynn?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the panelists for being here. Had a few questions. Maybe I'll start with Sabino. Sabino, tell me what work the election department would have to do if this was implemented to prepare for this.
That's a great question. We'd have to see what the rules and regulations in order for people to be able to participate would look like in order for us to implement.
Are we prepared if we pass this? Are you prepared to implement this for this coming year? Or I should say 2023?
I'm going to go off the deep edge here and say probably no. And reasons for that is we have to figure out how to flag any of these immigrants that want to participate in the upcoming municipal election in our database that we currently have. Right now, we use the state database to keep track of all of our 17-year-olds or older, as well as any registered voter, and that's a statewide database.
I think it's also important for us in the city council to advocate for the election department during the budget process too. They're doing more with less, in my opinion, at times, but we need to be a strong advocate and friend of the election department going into the budget season, budget process. Maybe one final question, and forgive me, it's off the topic a little bit. Sabina, we worked on a similar outreach to military veterans overseas accessing voting. Where do we stand on that?
I believe with the Votes Act of 2022, the state is implementing veterans to be able to vote online as if they would vote on federal or state elections. And that's being worked on as we speak for the upcoming municipal election in the falls of 2023.
So that's kind of like an umbrella coverage by the state covering all cities and towns. Is that accurate to say?
That is correct.
Okay. This month, we're celebrating the 35th anniversary of the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Advancement, founded by Mayor Flynn. I'm excited about that and the work Immigrant Advancement has been doing over the last 35 years. Tell me what the biggest concern you have as it relates to this proposal. How are we going to get immigrants engaged, involved in the political process with this voting or without the voting? What is the goal to include immigrants into our society as much as we can, because they play an incredible role in contribution, sacrifice to our city and nation? But what are we doing? What are some of the highlights that we're doing right now?
Some of the key highlights that I see right now is there's a lot of civic leadership of immigrants, regardless of immigration status right now, happening in our organizing work and in our Immigrants Needs Boston program, and even in a lot of volunteership programs that we have. So I look forward to deepening that and having more catered workshops and trainings for people to become more empowered so they can do more civic leadership practices now that regardless of is this new inclusion of non-citizens in voting. So I look forward to doing more of that work and also expanding people's and also people feeling more encouraged, knowing that they can be part of the social fabric of our communities without needing to have this program in place even this year. So I look forward to working for any efforts to increase the civic participation of our community members.
I worked with the Chinese Progressive Association on the recent ballot initiative on driver's license that passed. So can you So I say that, can you tell me if there's a distinction? One is obviously for driver's license, one is for voting. Is there any distinction between the two issues in terms of in terms of why someone may support ballot initiative and not support this proposal? Is there anything that would philosophically prevent someone to not support this?
In regards to people like supporting the initiative, in regard, like pushing back against the ballot initiative, for example?
Yes.
I think the people who are against inclusion of immigrants have the same, I'm assuming have the same mindset that there's not feeling like immigrants are worthy of this, but we as a community have chosen that and supported that with the driver's license law not being repealed, that we do believe the immigrants should have equal access to driver's licenses, also have equal access to civic participation. So I'm hoping that after that passed, the ballot initiative has been staying successful, that we as a society has progressed and seeing that immigrants should be included in driver's license access and also now with voting access as well. So I'm hoping that we progress as a society in that way. And I look forward to also encouraging immigrants through their driver's license implementation process that they don't feel ashamed or feel like, or even fearful that they are getting driver's license for the first time. So I'm excited about that. And there needs to be a lot of education and breaking of stigmas as we do that process.
Thank you. Could I ask one more question, Madam Chair? What is the percentage of immigrants in Boston Public Schools?
I don't know the numbers exactly in BPS. I can get that number to the council after this meeting, but we know for sure that almost 1/3 of our communities in general of Boston are immigrants. I believe there's a higher percentage in BPS, but I have to get the exact numbers to share with you.
And in BPS, we don't distinguish between undocumented or an immigrant in BPS. Is that accurate? And I agree we should not distinguish between them, but is that the philosophy of BPS?
I can't speak to PPS on how they record that data or track, but I don't believe that they track that information from my understanding.
Okay. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, President Flynn. And I'll say I'll take that as a formal request to probably Moya working with BPS to get back to the committee on the percentage of Boston Public Schools that's immigrant students. I assume that number has been increasing over the past year, so would love to get that those numbers. We've also been joined by Councilors Murphy and Councilor Collada. Councilor Murphy, you have the floor for any questions.
Sure. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, panelists, for being here. I'm here to listen and learn, so I don't really have any question right now except just some clarification when it says that you got information about 2.1 billion taxes being paid from immigrants in the city. Is that undocumented, or are we saying all together? Do you know, in the whereases in the statement?
Councilor Murphy, I think that's a question not for the panel, unless they're able to.
No, but I asked through the chair, because I just had a question that would have been connected, but do you know?
Do you?
I know that the panel doesn't know. I'm wondering if, just to try to clarify the difference here. Or you can get back to me on that. And also, thank you, Sabino. I know that Councilor Flynn asked kind of the connecting question I had. I know we worked on the veteran and college students and trying just to make sure how are we making government accessible to all and access to all, and the connections to the driving license bill seems, real and recent. So just here to listen and see how I can be an ally and support. So thank you very much, Chair. And I'll wait to get that back. Thank you.
Councilor Lara, did you want to respond?
Or do you have the answer now? That's fine. Or you can go to Councilor Colletta if you want to.
The information that we have about immigrants from Suffolk County does not specifically track whether an immigrant in the city or in the county has legal status or is documented. So they do not differentiate. So we don't have the information because they do not track it. So the information as stated is that immigrants in Suffolk County paid $2.1 billion, but they do not track whether or not these people have legal status or are undocumented.
All right, if they're citizens or not, or legal status. Okay, awesome.
Yep, sounds like the data is aggregated.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's set up. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Murphy. Councilor Coletta?
Thank you, Chair, and I want to thank the maker of this as well. And thank you all for being here, and thank you for your work, Sabina, Monique. Thank you so much for being here. And I'm sorry, I didn't get your name because I missed the presentation.
Elijah Miller, from Policy Director from the Office of Economic Opportunity and Inclusion.
Thank you, Elijah, for being here. As we know,
That is a pet peeve of mine sometimes when I can't figure out who's on the panel and I got here, so
well, I realized I said thank you to you both and not to you, so I didn't want to leave you up. Yeah, just thank you, everybody. As we know, no person is illegal, but through the eyes of the law, we're talking about legal permanent status. And these folks are neighbors of mine. They're wonderful folks. Temporary protected status, DACA residents. They pay taxes. They're business owners. They're involved in the community. So why shouldn't we allow them to be involved in local democracy and expanding local democracy, in my opinion, especially after the victory of the driver's license. So I think for me, this has always been a priority, and this will be a priority. And I do want to learn more about it. Of course, I want to gather all the data and the facts, and this is why we're here. But my questions are more around the procedures, and I apologize if I missed this in your opening statement, but adding upwards of 40,000 residents to your voter rolls is no small feat. And I know it will take a lot of work on behalf of the Elections Department and a lot of coordination and partnerships with Moya and Economic Opportunity. But how could we, or can you educate me about how would we even go about finding these folks? You know what I mean? Would this be something that elections would have to be proactive about? Would we ask folks to sign up? Like, what does that look like in your department if this were to pass? And then also if there's any ballpark dollar amounts in terms of resources of what you would need to actually get this done by the next election in 2021. Or sorry, excuse me, whatever year it is, 2023.
So I'll just jump in real quick on this. The city does do a city census every year, and the city census does ask for all residents age 17 or older. So that is a good start on where and how we can start incorporating a lot of the people that fail to respond to the census. And this is a good way for them to now become part of the solution, get their name on the census rolls, and then from those census rolls, it does update voter registrations on the most part for those folks, as well as maintain their voter status to active. Because if you don't respond to the census, you do become an inactive voter. Therefore, responding to the census will help alleviate a lot of extra work that we have to put together. And then from that point, any resident that is not registered is a means that we can work together to reach out to and see why they're not registered. It could be a choice, or it just means that they don't have the legal status to become a registered voter.
Do you feel like there's been high participation of residents who fall under this category? What are the numbers on that in terms of, and I guess we could look that up ourselves, but if there's anything that you could say here.
I don't have numbers in front of me, but I can tell you that the response rate from the city census is diminishing with the increase of the amount of residents that are coming into the city. So we do need active participation from all the residents of the city to respond to the census.
Thank you. And then in terms of outreach, I can imagine that there would be mailers that would have to go out. There would be a lot of community meetings, and that does take a lot of time, a lot of resources. Do you have any idea, just as we move forward in the budget cycle, what dollar amount would that be, or is it too early to say?
I think it's too early to say on our part. If you're talking about mailers, obviously there's postage and creation of those mailers. So depending on the amount of people that we have on our rolls that are non-registered residents, then that will indicate the cost of what that would be.
Looks like you wanted to say something, Monique.
Yes, I can speak to the outreach and engagement. I think, especially for immigrant communities, you have to be very For like front loading and a lot of the civic participation programs, you actually have to do active like ongoing outreach and engagement throughout the year, beyond just these flash in the pan moments whenever we need to do elections or census. So one thing I'm hoping to do through Moya is having a community organizing program where we're actually engaging regularly and building the immigrant base in regards to immigrants actually claiming the city as much as we claim them as constituents. So they will know and know of the energy and the ebbs and flows of all the ways that they can plug in and also lead the communities. So I'm looking forward to advocating for those resources because it will help us with the driver's license implementation and also in the event that we will have to have the census and making sure that they also are ahead of it. And also we can dispel any types of fear of engaging in even simple things like the census. And of course that would help build the capacity for, in the event that this passes in the city, that for municipal voting, that they'll be ready to go. And I'm hoping to use that as I would say testing ground too for participatory budgeting. I know that's something that the council's working on too as well.
That's great. I love that approach of ownership. This is your city as well. And I have seen and just heard of that happening in the Immigrants Lead Boston program,
Right.
which I absolutely adore, and I tried to get more money for in this budget, and I will always and forever. The last question that I have is just what approvals, if any, will we need from Secretary Galvin if this were to go through? Like what does our partnership look like with the state on this? Or can we just do it?
I believe there's a home rule petition that needs to take place, so Councilor Lara is looking at options, but I can't answer the legal part of it yet.
Okay.
And we have panelists from lawyers from civil rights at the next panel.
Okay, thank you. No further questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Coletta. We've also been joined by Councilor Rowell. Councilor Rowell, if you have any questions, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the panel, all your great work here in the city of Boston. I'm sorry that I'm late. My staff has been watching. I don't have any questions at this moment, but I am a child of immigrants, and I understand the impact that immigrants have here on the city of Boston, and they represent a large portion of our community. And being an inclusive city, we have to make sure that we include their voice. So definitely supportive of this effort, and anything I can do, Madam Chair and Councilor Lara, please count me on board. But thank you again for being here and making sure that we have a strong democracy and election process here in the city of Boston. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Rowell. Sabina, I'm sorry, did you want to respond at all to, okay. I have a few questions. One, just piggybacking off of Councilor Coletta, it seems as though this could be a process. We could potentially do a binding charter referendum that doesn't require us to go through the state if anyone has a comment but I don't know, it looks like there might be other avenues through which we can explore how this can happen. As Registrar Pamanti, can you tell us how often your office gets calls or inquiries from residents who believe that they have or can vote, or residents who recently became citizens but fall outside of the registration window? What is the frequency of those calls that you get in your office, or emails or outreach?
In regards for new citizens becoming registered, I believe they can register up until the day before the election, and there is not a huge amount of inquiries for those types of folks, but anyone that does call and inquire about that, we do take care of them. What we are getting numerous calls on is folks that have become registered to vote that are not citizens, and the process of removing them off of the voter rolls. We have quite a few of those.
Okay. Yeah, and if we restored the right to vote on the municipal level, that, at least for municipal elections, we wouldn't have to remove them from the rolls that were specific to municipal elections. So I asked because this year, an inquiry that I got on election day was from someone who recently became a citizen, but hadn't been given the opportunity to register to vote, and it was really heartbreaking. And so that's, I think, a question that's tied into sort of also how do we continue to further expand access to voting rights, which means same-day voter registration, which is not within our purview, but all of these need to work in tandem to make sure we're bringing everyone to the fore who is often marginalized by our processes that sideline them from participating in the democratic process. I guess my next question is for Director Nguyen. You talked about project citizenship, and my office was really excited to champion more resources for project citizenship because of how, again, how expensive it is, how labor intensive it is for folks to become citizens, and how daunting of a process it is. So 8 months maybe just for the application, but there's so much more outside of that that it can take upwards of 2 years, if not more, for many people. And an important part of the citizenship process is that if you make any mistake on your application, or if it's rejected, that money that you paid for the application process is foregone, right? You don't get it back. And so if you could talk a little bit more about how we assist our residents in the process, I think that would be helpful for folks.
Yes, definitely. We as a city, we have immigration consultations that are offered twice a month, like 2 weeks a month. And that happens every month, is ongoing throughout the year. But we rely heavily on partners that specialize in citizenship to leverage like attorneys and even their systems to support people even if their application gets rejected. So we leverage those avenues.
Thank you. And one of the reasons why it's also really important to have a lot of this assistance on the city level in partnership with organizations that we trust is that a lot of immigrants, unfortunately, fall privy to a lot of scams by immigrants or folks who believe that they have legal expertise. And so providing those resources on the city level is crucial. Helping to build that trust and engagement with immigrant populations is really important. Sabino, I have another question regarding the city survey. When we send it out every year, is there a disclaimer on it to members of the community that any information that is shared, we will not share with federal immigration authorities, so that as an encouraging way for folks to fill out the survey? Or could we think about doing something like that so that folks are more?
I'm not sure if we can. The city census is public information.
Okay. So we wouldn't be able to, we couldn't say that this information wouldn't be shared with. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Those are my questions. Second round, if anyone has any. Oh, we've also been joined by Councilor Mejia. Councilor Mejia, if you have any questions for the administration, that was the time.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Councilor Lara for bringing this to the council. I wanted to just say right off the bat that I am all hands, all in, and I appreciate you really having the what do I would say, trying to find the appropriate words in this chamber, the cojones. I said it in Spanish in case anybody wants to talk to me about my decorum up in here, but just really thank you and grateful for your leadership in this space. I'm just more curious about the mechanics of the implementation of something like this, and I'm not sure if those questions were already asked by any of my colleagues here, but in terms of rolling out something that is very specific and targeted to a group of folks who normally would not even think that this is something as an opportunity for them, what would the rollout and communication strategy look like in terms of implementation?
It's a good question. In regards to the election department, a lot of education in regards to who can participate in this and how they can participate and what requirements will have to be put in place for it. In the previous hearing that we had on this back a few years ago, there are other communities that use, what's the word here? Requirements as such as photo IDs or residency IDs in order to keep that residency intact, an education piece. So there's a lot of work that will have to go around the education of letting these residents know that if they do participate in these municipal elections, it's strictly for Boston and Boston only. And I'll give you an example. I live in East Boston, and there are folks that think that because they live in Chelsea, Winthrop, or Revere, they're part of Boston. Mm-hmm. And that may confuse them to think that because they move from East Boston to Revere or one of these other surrounding communities, they can also participate in their municipal elections. And then they can become registered voters there. So education is the key component of how this is going to work.
Mm-hmm. And can you talk to us a little bit about what that will look like for those who are undocumented that may think that they also have the right and they're eligible to vote, and how that could potentially, you know, in terms of education, how would you communicate that to folks?
We'll use Office of Immigrant Advancements.
That's right.
You know, big time for that. But according to how the ordinance is written, that would also educate us on what we need to do to implement this. So until we see any of that stuff, it's kind of hard to come up with some suggestions or ideas on how we're going to do it.
And the reason why I asked that question in particular is because we know that it is, again, it's unlawful to register to vote if you are not a U.S. citizen, let alone undocumented, right? And so I just want to make sure that we protect our undocumented community as we continue to roll out this in terms of communication and what it means. But can you just talk to us a little bit about what would be some of the benefits for creating opportunities for legal residents to be able to actually vote in municipal elections? What can you talk to us a little bit about some of those wins?
I'll pass that on to you guys. We're here to run the elections.
Yeah, I can talk about how, well, something that, like a tenet of mine as a leader, is that I don't believe any solution that we put forth as society will be refined and solved for unless the people who are directly impacted are helped designing for that solution. So for me, the benefit of my work would be needing their leadership to feel empowered that they can actually pinpoint the problems that we have of the community and solve for them. So just knowing that I'll have access to more people that feel that they have a voice to actually name these things, and it gives me more encouragement that we can tackle these problems as a society together. And for in engagement, even for folks who are undocumented, for me, this is something that's been something I've been kind of picking my brain about. How do we even cultivate a culture of the family vote? Because we know a lot of families who are immigrants have mixed statuses. And a lot of hardship during election times is that whole families don't want to vote because knowing that their mother or their grandmother can't vote, so they feel shamed about it. Something I'm hoping through my office that we do organizing as through a family. And then even if there are undocumented members, that they discuss as a family together who can vote and vote on the behalf of folks who are in our family that are documented. So that way we can have those conversations about different levels of varying status and how we can leverage even undocumented folks in the family can have a voice through other family members, and them kind of being that person to kind of push forward the family vote. So, so I'm hoping that through those pathways we can have that education about folks who don't have status, but folks who have status to be able to move together politically and engage. And I think Elijah can speak to the economic piece.
Oh yeah, speak to the economics piece, yes.
Absolutely. So sometimes it gets overlooked, but the most important part of our economy is our people. Without people, you do not have an economy. And the total size or total value of our economic output, therefore, is directly correlated with the number of people participating and giving their all, essentially, whether they are self-employed or they work for somebody else. And when people are disenfranchised politically, culturally, they're stigmatized, they retreat from giving their fullest, and that only makes our economy weaker. So I do believe that by enfranchising people, we will help grow a stronger economy in the city of Boston.
Thank you. And Sabina, last question. Is this something that if, once we get this approved, because I'm always speaking things to existence, when do you foresee in terms of timing and implementation, how long would you need to be able to roll something out like this?
We will work with the administration to try to implement it as quickly as we can.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilor. And I also just want to echo, a lot of the work seems to be like it would be around education, and that would be the work that you do, Dr. Nguyen, in Moya. And I know that there is sincere interest in helping to support the resources necessary for the community organizing program, but also we'll rely on your deep partnerships that you already have with community-based organizations, grassroots organizations that are immigrant-led, that are Black and Brown-led, that will really help explain voting rights, municipal voting rights to immigrants, really relying on the communities and foundations of trust that exist within that. So I do see your office being an integral role in the deep partnerships you have with community organizations and Immigrant Leads Boston. So thank you for being here. I also want to ask if all of the panelists' opening statements were wonderful. If we could have them submitted in writing to the committee so that we can just have them for the record, that would be great. Thank you. Going on now for our second round of questions. Councilor Lara, if you have any questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all again for all of your thoughtful questions. I think in terms of implementation, I want to echo what Councilor Louis-Jean said in terms of it being all hands on deck. And I think, given Director Nguyen, what you shared about the fact that people can have a visa that kind of keeps them in perpetual business status and not give them the ability to vote, that Moya will be working in collaboration with the Office of Economic Opportunity Inclusion to reach out to business owners who fall under this, and with the Arts and Culture Office to reach out to artists and people who have access. So just wanting to just reiterate and highlight that immigrants who have legal status here in the city of Boston fall along all sectors, and that like the education and the implementation is not just going to fall on you and your office, but that it's going to have to be something that we're going to have to invest in across the board in order to be able to communicate it properly. One of the questions that I have is about the voter registration form. Can we make changes to the voter registration form?
That's a state form.
It's a state form. And so let's say when a 16 to 17-year-old registers to vote here in the city of Boston, we'll know because the voter registration asks for their age.
That's correct.
That they receive only the municipal ballot.
Correct.
But if someone who is an immigrant with legal status, there is no way of knowing that they are receiving the municipal ballot.
No, on that registration form, it clearly states, are you a U.S. citizen is one of the questions.
And so if somebody answers no, then the elections department here would have to make the assumption that they are only receiving the municipal ballot.
If we use that form for this process.
And so we have the ability to create a municipal voter registration form.
I would assume yes.
Got it. Where we can ask someone's status. So I'm trying to correct for the issue that Councilor Mejia has posed to us about people who are undocumented, maybe understanding that they can. And so if we have a local voter registration form that asks people's status, and people can check off TPS, DACA, undocumented, then it would give the elections department the ability to not register people. Even though they fill out the form, you could not register people who select that they're undocumented, and we could kind of create like a layer of protection. But I guess in the implementation, I'm unsure. Creating a municipal ballot, making sure that people, like a registration form, municipal voter registration form specifically. I don't know. Do you see any challenges, or how would you imagine that happening?
I like your idea of a municipal registration form for the purpose of registering them. I just haven't thought about how to keep track of them, meaning the Secretary of State's website, database right now is mainly geared to registered voters and residents over the age of 17, but it will not allow us to indicate if somebody is registering only for a municipal ballot.
And so have we solved the home rule petition that we just sent up to the state for 16 to 17-year-olds? Have we solved for how to gather that information, or?
Yes, all 16 and 17-year-olds, as we speak now, can pre-register. So if
So
somebody,
because they can pre-register, they're already in the database.
that's correct. Well, they're not in the active database, but they're in a queue, waiting to be processed when they become of age.
And so we're talking about the possibility of also having to build our own city municipal database for people who are non-citizens as well, in
That is-
terms of monetary and investment.
That is probably the course that we have to take. So maintaining 2 databases, to answer your question, it's going to be a lot of work.
You would probably need somebody in your office that would focus specifically on that, correct?
Or a handful of folks. If you're talking 60 to 70,000 people that may take advantage of that, that's cities across the state that have less than that amount of residents in their community. So it's like running 2 different.
Two parallel processes at the same time. Okay, that's good to know. I think that everybody here, all of our questions are about how we set you up for success. And so database, people power in the elections department, that's really helpful to know. Those are all the questions that I had for the administration's panel. I just wanted to follow up on that because of the concern that Councilor Mejia brought up. Thank you all. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Coletta. Can we turn off Aaron's? Okay, awesome. Councilor Coletta, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. This is so incredibly informative, and just talking about databases, it calls to mind that knowledge or information is power, right? And so when we have databases, people want access to that information. So I'm worried about the protection of, especially this group of folks' identity, and making sure that they're protected. So with that, in just terms of cybersecurity, it was in my mind to ask you what sort of systems you have in place right now, Sabino, to protect folks' identity and who they are and where they live, and if they are legal permanent residents. Is that something that would need to be built out as well?
The current database is controlled by the Secretary of State's office, so they have all sorts of cybersecurity built into the system.
Okay, so we would need our own then, basically.
It all depends. That is something that we'll have to discuss going forward on what the requirements are for these residents to become part of this new program, and to see if we can use the current database that we have with the state in order to implement it. Obviously, one database is the ideal location for our office, because these folks are not only registering for municipal elections, but they're also residents, so they are part of our census, which is controlled by the state database. So these folks will have to be entered in to 2 different databases simultaneously, and those 2 databases have to be maintained simultaneously at the same time.
And also protected too. I mean, there's been instances in the city before where one database has been shared with another department, and there have been unfortunate consequences, especially as it relates to undocumented immigrants in East Boston. So I think that I'd like to talk through that a little bit more as we discuss implementation moving forward, and just seeing what you need. If there is a database that the city has, just making sure that is protected and secure. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Mejia, do you have any follow-up questions?
Wanted to just follow that thread a little bit more in regards to supporting our community, and this is just more like in terms of education and the engagement piece around this, is that, as we roll this out, really making sure that people know that by participating in municipal elections, it won't impact their ability to pursue citizenship down the line. I mean, because there's a lot of folks, my mom was undocumented for a period of time, became a U.S. citizen. Like, there's a lot of myths that are out here. And so I just want to make sure that as we continue to roll this out, that we are making sure that every step of the way that people know that participating in municipal elections with their legal status will not impact their U.S. citizenship piece. And then the other piece of it in terms of education and engagement, to Councilor Lada's point, and I believe it was yours in regards to the economic impact. But there are a lot of businesses here that can also be part of your engagement and outreach surrogates, if you will, like to help disseminate information in barbershops, hair salons, laundromats, multi-service centers. Like, these are all folks who can help support the rollout of something like this, so that Sabino doesn't have to figure out how he could do it all. Once you create the content, Moya could work with the Office of Economic Opportunity and Inclusion to help tap into those businesses, because it's going to take all of us. And I think that in order for something to be set up for success, it is going to require, different departments leaning into that work. And I think one of the things that Councilor Lara mentioned in terms of capacity, Sabino, to give some thought to additional workers, all of that would be helpful to know as we continue to move forward, because it does seem like we're going to, under the leadership of Councilor Lara, make this happen. So get ready for it, Sabino, because it's coming your way. You ready? Good. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you. We've also been joined by Councilor Arroyo, but first I'm going to go to Councilor Orell to see if you have any, if you have second round questions.
No further questions.
Okay. Councilor Arroyo, you now have the floor.
Thank you so much. And I just want to start by saying I fully support this initiative. It's something that my father, in his time on the council, attempted to get passed, and actually I think went down 7-6 at the time. The only counselor on the council now who was there then was Michael Flaherty, who I believe voted in favor at that time of the initiative. And so I expect that this will likely do better with this council. One of my questions, I think, from the standpoint of the population that we are talking about for opening accessibility to voting, and frankly, for the first time in their lives here for municipal elections or any other election, is language access. And so I guess my question is, how much work do we already currently do on language access around voting? And in which ways would that need to expand to make sure that for folks that are being brought into this process for the first time, they're able to read and understand everything that we're trying to put down for them?
So the ballot right now is printed in four languages, English, Spanish, Chinese, and Vietnamese. But all of our outreach is done in 11 different languages that the city supports.
And what was I'm assuming some calculus or some formula was used to determine those four languages. Is it amount of voter share? Is it amount of population? Like, what are the decisions that are going into those four languages being the ones that are used by the ballots?
I believe it was a Department of Justice settlement with the city a few years back. So
the Department of Justice settlement led to those four language changes, but they're not necessarily, for instance, Portuguese or Haitian Creole, or so it's not based on necessarily what the largest voting share population is to those languages specifically in the city of Boston. It's not like those are the top four languages of folks who go to vote. It's just those are the four that came through a DOJ or some.
Correct. But after every decennial census, the federal government does announce the languages that need to be, the ballots need to be printed based upon the size of the population of those languages. And right now, I believe the city of Boston, based upon the decennial census, is only English in all precincts, and some precincts is Spanish, but obviously the city does the whole city in Spanish, as well as Chinese and Vietnamese in the precincts that require it.
And then in terms of the language determinations, is that a state, like, so when we're talking about getting the ballots printed in different languages, is that something that the city of Boston has the ability to control how many languages get on there? If they want to add additional languages, could the city of Boston do that, or is that mandated through the state in some way, shape, or form?
It's a combination of the state also participating and helping us.
So is there a world in which we could say we would like it to be in this language, and the state could come back and say we're not going to support that, or we're not going to do that?
It's a possibility.
All right. Thank you. So we'll cross those bridges when we get there. But I think language accessibility, especially on something like this, is going to be an important part of, I was listening in earlier, it's going to be an important part of education and rollout, just based on how this goes, making sure that folks can read this information in the language that they are most comfortable in reading and taking in. But I support this initiative. I look forward to seeing this move forward in a more official way in the future. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the sponsors.
Thank you. And Monique, I know you have a hard stop at 11:30. It is now 11:30, so I'm going to let you all leave. I will just say that a lot of the questions that came up around implementation and about best practices are really great questions. And it's really also wonderful that there are other cities and municipalities that have already moved forward with this. So there's a lot to learn, I think, from how other cities and states have engaged in this conversation to see how they separate out voter rolls and how they create, obviously, I think you would need like a mini office within the elections office that works on this issue that has a deep, deep tie-in with Moya. But it would be, you know, this is where we learn from other places that have already rolled out the ball here on this issue, so there are lots of places for us to learn. So thank you again for being here, for being part of this conversation about how we restore municipal voting rights, and glad to see the administration supportive. If we could get those opening statements again in writing, that'd be great. So, but thank you to Elijah, Monique, Sabino for being here and for sharing your time, energy, and expertise with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
We are now going to move on to our next panel. And I believe everyone is here. If you can make your way down. We have Alex Kaiser, the Matthew W. Sterling Junior Professor of History and Social Policy at Harvard University, is here via Zoom. Jacob Love, staff attorney from the Lawyers for Civil Rights, and Shanique Spalding from the Massachusetts Voter Table, who's the executive director, also here via Zoom. Okay. So Jacob Love, you'll be in the hot seat here by yourself, and then the two other participants are here via Zoom. Okay. Okay. Professor Kaiser, am I saying your name correctly?
No.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, it's pronounced Kesar.
Okay, Professor Kesar, you now have the floor. Thank you for your patience.
Okay, well, thank you, and thank you for inviting me to speak on this very important issue. As was, I think, mentioned in the introduction, I teach at the Harvard Kennedy School, and I am a historian of voting rights who has written a lot about this particular issue, among others. And my comments will be brief, but I'll be happy to answer questions. And what they focus on is an important fact that allowing non-citizens to vote in municipal elections is not a new departure in American history. This is something which has been done on many occasions, and actually also in state and even federal elections in some periods. For long periods of time, in many locales, non-citizens who displayed a commitment to their community have been able to cast ballots. So this is not a new story, and let me give, it's not a new idea. It's not a new concept. There's nothing that's breaking with American tradition in doing this. Although I think that's not commonly understood. I think there is out there in the world a sense that, oh, we've only let citizens vote. Well, that hasn't really been true. And let me make just some brief comments about that, and then something about why the ebbs and flows in this practice. When the nation was first created, actually, there was the distinction between citizen and inhabitant was not clear, and the laws governing the right to vote were murky. Gradually, in the early 19th century, those laws tightened up, and most states did adopt a standard of requiring citizens. But then, starting in the middle of the 19th century, many states adopted what were called alien declarant laws. These were laws saying, quite simply, that if somebody was an immigrant, they were not a citizen, but they had lived here for 2 years and declared their intent to become a citizen at some point, that they could vote. These laws were first adopted in the Midwest in the mid-19th century, and then after the Civil War, they were adopted in a number of places in the West and the South. And they were passed because numerous jurisdictions wanted to encourage immigration, and also because they thought it would be sort of fair and attractive to immigrants to be able to vote. These these laws were challenged in the courts and were invariably approved by the courts. May quote here from one Illinois Supreme Court case that the right of suffrage to those who, having by habitation and residence identified their interests and feelings with the citizenry, although they may be neither native nor adopted citizens. The principle was simply people identified with and belonged to the community that they should be able to vote. Several dozen, roughly 2 dozen, not several dozen, states adopted these laws. They were then pulled back, revised, sort of annulled in the late 19th and early 20th century as parts of the country, most of the country, confronted very high levels of immigration, and there was basically a turn against immigrant rights. And the last state to repeal declarant alien laws was Arkansas in the 1920s. The issue then disappeared from view for a while because immigration rates were rather low from World War I into the early 1960s. And the federal courts said simply that it was okay to exclude non-citizens, but they didn't require it. And then now what we've seen, then we have another shift. What we're seeing now is growing interest in non-citizen voting because the country, since the increase in immigration rates starting starting in the 1970s, 1980s, the increase in immigration rates has produced millions of people in the United States who are legal residents, who pay taxes, own homes, hold jobs, have children in public schools, but cannot vote. These people are, in effect, de facto, if not de jure, citizens. And as members of the council surely know, there have been a number of experiments and movements to permit non-citizens to vote for school boards and for other local offices in a number of cities around the United States. And we should note also that this practice, again, there's nothing unusual about U.S. practices here. In fact, in Europe, the rights are more extensive and more easily attained. In Ireland, Netherlands, and Scandinavia, non-citizens have been able to vote for municipal offices for decades. In the 1990s, a treaty within the European Union permits all citizens of the EU to vote in the local elections in whatever country and city they are inhabiting. In brief, my comment as a scholar of voting rights is that the legislation that you are contemplating falls well within the mainstream of American history and Western history more broadly, and is a reaction to basic notions of fairness and also of encouraging democracy in a world in which migration is increasingly common. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for your remarks and for grounding us in history and in the present. Appreciate your words. We're going to now move on to Shanique Spalding from the Massachusetts Voter Table, also via Zoom.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairwoman Lujan and Councilor Laura, for the opportunity to speak. My name is Shanique Spalding, once again, and I'm the Executive Director for the Massachusetts Voter Table. We are a coalition of 45 nonprofit organizations rooted in communities of color in Massachusetts. Our mission is to increase civic engagement in BIPOC and immigrant and working class communities in Massachusetts. We support the proposal to restore the municipal right to vote for immigrants with legal status as filed by Councilor Laura. Boston residents who are immigrants should have the same say in our city as any other citizen resident. Immigrants live here, work here, raise children here, and pay taxes here. Local laws and policies affect non-citizens every day. They are all governed by policies set by legislators they have no ability to elect or influence. Efforts to give local Efforts to give legal non-citizen voting rights are significant because they help provide a voice to those with a vested stake in their communities, as well as a sense of belonging and I should know. I was once a permanent resident and an immigrant from Kingston, Jamaica. I am now a naturalized citizen. Both my parents have lived in this country for nearly 40 years. They were business owners for 15 of those years. They joined the neighborhood council as business owners, gave out free meals during Thanksgiving to the needy, and volunteered in elections they couldn't vote in. They pay taxes, own a home, shop exclusively local in their community. They, like so many non-citizens, have given greatly to their communities, but with no say in local government. The path to citizenship is expensive and difficult, as we've heard from the mayor's office. It costs up to $3,000 for myself and my mother to become citizens. We could not afford in 2007 to also pay for my father. But barriers to cost, access to naturalization are not the only inhibitors for some. But what about our temporary protected status residents? They can neither go home to their birth country or become citizens in this country. Should they also continue to live here and be disenfranchised? Enfranchising non-citizen voters exemplifies a healthier democracy. We cannot abide by a system that takes money from our residents without any say in the municipal government. We know that immigrant communities want this right. Our partner, Neighbors United for a Better East Boston, has set up voting simulations that offer a chance for immigrants, regardless of their status, to vote in mock elections. Our non-citizen neighbors want their voices to be heard in the political system. People like New Bay members and people like my father would like that right. Now is the time to build an inclusive democracy for everyone. Restoring the municipal right to vote for immigrants with legal status is an important step forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Shanique, for your leadership at the Massachusetts voter table and for sharing your personal story. Now going to move on to Jacob Love, staff attorney at the Lawyers for Civil Rights. Jacob, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Jacob Love, and I'm a staff attorney at Lawyers for Civil Rights in Boston. LCR is a nonprofit legal organization whose primary mission is to fight discrimination on behalf of people of color and immigrants. We respectfully submit this testimony at today's hearing before the Committee on Civil Rights and Immigrant Advancement to support the restoration of municipal voting rights to immigrants with legal status. Non-citizen voting is the suffrage movement of our time. Just like previous groups that have been denied the right to vote in this country, immigrants with legal status deserve suffrage in municipal elections at the very least, as a matter of fundamental fairness. A basic tenet of democracy is the idea of the social contract, that those who are subject to the government's laws should have a say in shaping them. That principle has animated civil rights movements since America's founding, and it is particularly relevant here. Immigrants with legal status not only abide by Boston's laws, but they also contribute to Boston society in countless and invaluable ways. They pay taxes, run businesses, work as doctors and lawyers, send their children to public schools, and even serve in the military. As active members of society, it is only fair that they be able to influence the rules and institutions that affect their daily lives. With municipal voting rights, they would finally be able to do so directly. And it is now more important than ever for immigrants to have their voices heard. Over the last few years, inflammatory anti-immigrant rhetoric has endangered immigrant safety and caused discrimination against immigrant groups to soar. As an inevitable byproduct of this environment, immigrants continue to face disparate treatment in areas like housing, medicine, childcare, and employment. LCR has seen this firsthand in our work with immigrants this year. Over the last 12 months, we have repeatedly seen immigrants being exploited and mistreated by private and government actors alike. Reenfranchisement would allow immigrant groups to push back on injustices like these. For those reasons and many others, Lawyers for Civil Rights supports the effort to restore municipal voting rights to immigrants with legal status. Doing so would serve to advance the fundamental American ideals of fairness, equality, and inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Jacob, and for all the work Lawyers for Civil Rights has been doing for our immigrant communities. We've also been joined by City Councilor Tanya Fernandez Anderson. I'm going to turn it over to Councilor Lara for any questions you have for the panel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think that this this question is for anybody who can answer it. What does the state constitution say about who currently has the right to vote?
So I can delve into this question a little bit. As far as I understand state law, I'm not sure if it's in the state constitution, but there certainly are state laws that define voter eligibility in Massachusetts, and my understanding is that they use the word citizen, and that in the past the Supreme Judicial Court has interpreted the word citizen to mean American citizen. And so that fundamental tenet of Massachusetts law complicates things, but it is also my understanding that the state laws that define voter eligibility also allow for special laws to be passed that would allow for non-citizens to vote. And so the home rule petition process is a valid means of creating municipal voter eligibility, and my understanding of Massachusetts law.
And so it does state in the affirmative who has the right to vote, but it does not state who does not. It does not prevent anyone from voting. It only gives a right in the affirmative.
That's correct.
In the implementation, and this might be for the professor, in the implementation of these policies, and also maybe for you, Jacob, what kind of challenges, legal challenges, have you seen come up against the implementation of these kind of policies?
Well, I can go first. So as a matter of federal law, obviously, as the City Council knows, non-citizens are not allowed to vote in federal elections. But the federal Constitution allows states to regulate the time, place, and manner of elections. So primarily, these laws would be interpreted under state constitutions and state law. And so to the extent that these municipal voting laws that have been passed in various jurisdictions across the country have been challenged, they've been challenged under state law. So any challenge to a municipal voting law that this body passes, as I understand it, would be brought under state law.
If I can, I think you asked me to comment on this as well.
Yes, please.
And let me make one point in passing, which is that even in federal elections, to my knowledge, and I've been trying to pin this down, Congress only prohibited non-citizen voting for federal elections in 1996. It's a recent development and a reaction to current circumstances, not a long-standing tradition. I agree with I think it's with Jacob that this would become largely a matter of state law. Most state constitutions have laws governing the franchise for what are called constitutional offices. That's to say, offices mentioned in the state constitution, which generally does not include municipal officers. Now, I'm not an attorney, so you shouldn't rely on me to chart the strategic path for this. But certainly, based on the experiences of other states, there are openings here. There are possibilities of navigating this through.
And do we know how many of the ordinances we have about, I think it was maybe 15 to 18 municipalities across the country who have implemented this? Do we know how many of them have done through by city ordinance, or how many have petitioned their state?
I'm not sure off the top of my head, but again, because these jurisdictions all operate under different laws, most of the mechanisms that they've used to pass the laws are going to vary quite a lot.
And so I guess part of the line of questioning that I'm trying to get in terms of the legal is that, and we've been working with Lawyers to Civil Rights since March on this issue and having this conversation around whether or not we have the legal ability as a city through ordinance or some other municipal mechanism, have the ability to do this without going through a home rule petition. And part of the reason why I'm asking that question is because we have seen other states where in their constitution, they not only give the right in the affirmative, but they also deny it to non-citizens. And so I see a legal opening where there is a right given in the affirmative, but not a right denied, where we might be able to have the option to go through our municipal charter and our ordinance process here. And so can you share a little bit more about what your either legal advice or your legal analysis of that is?
Well, as a starting place, I think that the home rule petition process is the most traditional and the safest process to ensure that any law that's passed by this body would withstand scrutiny in the courts. Given the environment that we're in, I would be very surprised if it wasn't challenged. Hopefully it wouldn't be, but if it is, I think that following a process that is as grounded as it can possibly be in the state constitution and state law would be the best way to go. And the home rule petition process is well tread and well understood. And for that reason, and also it would bring in other parts of the state government, obviously, in order to be fully implemented. And so for that reason, I think the home rule petition process is the safest and probably the most effective way to go, but that doesn't mean that other mechanisms, for example, through a city ordinance, wouldn't be legal. It's just that I think that those mechanisms would probably be more complicated.
And would put us at higher risk of legal challenge.
Without saying definitively, I think that just looking how ordinances like these have been passed around the country and in the past, the safest way to go would be the home rule petition process.
Thank you, Professor. Or would you, yes, Shanique, thank you. Would either of you want to give any insight or opinions on those questions, or your thoughts on how you would move forward?
I would agree with what was said. I think a home rule petition. A lot of this depends on the intricacies of the state constitution, and I confess that I haven't looked at the Massachusetts Constitution with regard to this issue. But I think that a home rule petition route is the most common. Different state constitutions make that easier or more difficult.
Thank you. And I don't have any further questions. I'll leave my colleagues to ask more of them and maybe have a second round.
Thank you, Councilor Latta. I'm going to move on to Councilor Coletta if you have any questions for the panel.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to thank the panelists for being here, and thank you, Shanique, as well, for uplifting the work at New Bay. Shout out to Eni and Gloria Belmocha for their work. It's groundbreaking. So I just wanted to shout them out as well. My line of questioning was to get more insight into charting a path to get this done. So it's interesting to hear you say that the home rule petition process would be the safest legal mechanism to do this. Of course, I have my reservations about that process, and just based on how unsuccessful some home rule petitions have been up at the State House, and if there is a way to do this by sitting ordinance, I would like to move that forward. I think it's very savvy, Councilor Lara, that you highlighted the difference between the right given and the affirmative. And so I think that if there is will to do this in the city, that we should, Boston, move forward without getting any permission from the state. And if it goes to court, it'll go to court. But I just want to go on record in saying that I think I would like to see this go through in ordinance form rather than going up to the State House and waiting for that. So that's just my comment. I don't have any questions, but I don't know if anybody wanted to respond to that on the panel. It's okay if not.
Thank you, Councilor Coletta. Councilor Mejia?
Yeah, thank you. We already know what happens when things go to the State House. They die. No, just joking. So which is probably why we've all lost hope in sending things over there. And so as we continue to identify the best paths forward, I'm just curious if you all have worked with other municipalities around this here in the state, that you can point to other cities that have attempted, or are we going to be the first? Like, can you talk to us a little bit about other folks who have tried, and maybe we can figure out what lessons we've learned from them. Is there any examples that you could point to here that we could learn from?
Sure, and I know Councilor Lara's office is familiar with the other jurisdictions in Massachusetts that have attempted to or passed these types of laws. Cambridge, for example, has done so, and there are at least half a dozen others that I can't think of off the top of my head, but Boston would not be the first in Massachusetts. There are others, Vermont, Maryland, for example. San Francisco did the same thing, in New York as well, and some of those laws have been challenged and some haven't, but we would not be the first in Boston.
So I'm happy to hear you say that on the record, because it goes to show that there is hope, right, in sending it over to the State House, because we can point to very specific examples that have happened already here locally. And do you know what year it happened in Cambridge? Did they pass it?
I'm not sure that it's fully passed through the home rule petition process in any of those jurisdictions.
Oh, it hasn't been? No.
My understanding is that in Amherst and in Cambridge, they've submitted home rule petitions that are at the State House. So the only thing that they're waiting for is State House approval.
Okay, so we don't have anything that we can say successfully has been done in the state of Massachusetts through home rule petition at this point.
I believe that's correct.
Okay. Yeah.
But this is a relatively new movement in Massachusetts as well. That's another thing to take into account. Advocacy is important in order to sort of shift public opinion in the direction of passing this, and to shift legislative opinion in the direction of passing this. We need to continue talking about it and continue trying to pass these laws.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If I can come in here briefly, I think Brookline also tried to do this and has not yet succeeded. And the record in Massachusetts certainly it creates grounds for some concern about submitting a home rule petition, however much that might be the most legally straightforward path. I would encourage staff of the city council or someone to get in touch with people in Maryland, which has had a particularly easy time, relatively easy time in permitting municipalities to actually do this. And there are municipalities which do permit non-citizen voting. And this may have to do with I don't know whether it's interpretations or details of the Maryland Constitution, but that might be a place to try to engage in strategic discussions.
Thank you, Professor. Yeah, Maryland stands out an example both in 16 and 17-year-old voting and here with non-citizenship voting. I think it's Tacoma Park where they allow both. They seem to have like an easier process there. So yeah, there's a lot of lessons for us to learn in this context, especially now when, because of fear of restoring the rights for municipal voting rights for immigrant populations, you see a lot of states intentionally going into their constitution and prohibiting it. And where there is no prohibition, there's more wiggle room, and so they are trying to get ahead of these conversations by being explicit in the language. And so I think there's not been a lot of success here through the home rule petition, and so exploring other ways I think is also prudent. Referendum or process as well. I think all of those could be looked at here. Going to move on to Councilor Arroyo, if you have any questions for the panel.
Thank you. I just want to thank the panels, both panels. I didn't get to thank the other one previously. I'm sure they're not watching now, but thank you to them as well. But the state process for folks who aren't observing our home rule petitions has, even in the best of times, even with mayoral support and pushing of the House and the Senate, has led often to nothing. And so I think trying to go through that process is another way of saying we may as well make it a resolution at that point, frankly, and just say we support the idea, but we don't think it'll happen. And so I think going through the ordinance standpoint of that, and I'm not sure who would have standing to even sue on that. So that would be something we would have to figure out, like who would even have standing to bring a lawsuit to block that. But from the standpoint of, as the chair of government ops, looking at this from an ordinance standpoint and a city standpoint, I think that would be my preference, as opposed to going through a home rule petition and watching another home rule petition go wherever those home rule petitions end up when they get to the House. So there's that. The second part of this is we know that there are other cities, major cities. I think New York just did something on this or just voted on something on this just this year or last year to extend voting rights, I believe, to folks who have documented status. So this is not, even when my father proposed this in 2006, I think there were like 53 municipalities in the country that did this at this time. Once again, this is not a cutting edge first time something gets done here. And actually, I didn't know, and thank you for that history, I didn't know it was that recent that 1996 is when federal laws changed to that effect. I didn't know that. So that was very helpful. From the standpoint of questions, I'm not sure I have any specific questions on sort of this issue, unless I think we have this is just one attorney we have on our panel? Yeah, unless you have any idea as to the standing question as to, so for instance, who would be able to even sue on behalf of, I guess who would they be suing on behalf of is sort of the question in terms of any changes we made as an ordinance towards expanding voting rights.
Well, Councilor, I would just say that given that we support this movement, I'm not sure that it would be a good idea for me to posit legal strategies challenging this movement. I would say it's a good question, and anyone who's here can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that the New York City law that extended voting rights to municipal voters for non-citizens was struck down as a matter of New York State law. So clearly, in that case, a judge did find that the challengers had standing and ultimately struck it down.
But was it a challenge to, this is, I guess, a question that you may not have the answer to and I can look up later. Was it a challenge to how it related to the state constitution of New York? Or was it?
It was absolutely a matter of state law in New York, yes.
Okay, so basically as long as there's a viable and couchable sort of way of doing this, and the city ordinance, because it's a city of Boston election that doesn't in some way, shape, or form conflict with what the actual state constitution says, it's not a matter of, for instance, federal law, since it doesn't involve federal elections.
It's not a matter of federal law, no.
So basically, as long as we're in alignment with what we believe is the best sort of interpretation of state law towards this, there is a path of viability within an ordinance sort of standpoint.
I would say that there is a path of viability. Yes, it may be complicated, and I'm not in a position to describe exactly how it should be done mechanically. I think the City Council should explore all available options, and I also don't think the City Council is precluded from trying to pass it in both methods. If the City Council attempts to go through the home rule petition process and that stalls in the state government, then it could move on, or it could do both simultaneously. There are a lot of available options.
I like the idea of perhaps even trying to do both simultaneously, and I would just say that the incoming Attorney General is the last counselor who was on this body to advance this concept, and so I think that there might even be some synergy with the Attorney General's office and the council as we sort of pursue a way to do this. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Arroyo. And yeah, just want to reaffirm that I think a judge blocked the New York law in June that the legislature passed. So
yes, and I believe it was a state judge in New York.
It was a state judge. Okay, Councilor Fernandez-Anderson, do you have any questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to acknowledge that Councilor Anderson has joined us.
I said that.
You said that?
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry I'm late. I think my questions are going to be very basic since I'm just getting here, and I really want to, at least for my constituents, I want folks to understand and be able to interpret to my folks. So can you, if you can, I'm sorry, what's your name, attorney?
My name is Jacob Love. I'm a staff attorney at Lawyers for Civil Rights here in Boston.
Sorry, Attorney Love, what's your first name?
Jacob.
Jacob. Can you describe the process by which the voting rights were initially taken away and why this occurred? And I'm going to go through these questions. They're going to be basic. Apologies, Jacob. And if you've already answered them, feel free to say pass.
So I know that the professor knows a lot about this topic, and he can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding was, at least as voting eligibility was initially defined in the Massachusetts Constitution, inhabitants of Massachusetts. It was either the word inhabitant or resident were allowed to vote. Obviously, there are restrictions, I think, based on property ownership as well. But in the 19th century, the early mid-19th century, the Constitution was amended to use the word citizen, and the Supreme Judicial Court later interpreted that change of language to be intentional and to mean that they switched the word inhabitant to citizen for a reason, and that reason was to define voter eligibility based on American citizenship. But at the beginning of this Commonwealth and into the early 19th century, non-citizens were eligible to vote. And so this is something that has been allowed in the past and throughout other jurisdictions in the United States up until much later than the early 19th century. And the professor can add to that if there's anything to add.
I think the lawyer got the history pretty much right, and that's good. But let me add one other dimension to this, which is that in the first half of the 19th century, the law was such that municipalities, if they had charters that predated independence, had autonomy from the states in many areas, including with respect to the franchise. In the second half of the 19th century, the laws throughout the United States alter the relationship between municipalities and the state, transforming cities into creations or creatures of the state and state legislatures, giving them less autonomy. Then that coincides with the narrative that I had alluded to earlier and that Jacob Love just mentioned now, so that there's some precedent in Massachusetts in the early 19th century, but not for a very long time, have non-citizens been permitted to vote in this city, in this state.
Thank you. And it's been shown that encouraging people to vote or giving people the rights creates engagement, increases civic engagement or government participation. Can you speak to this?
Speak to the statistics specifically?
Sure. Thank you.
No, I'm unable to. The professor may be able to do that better than I can.
I don't think that's the case. I don't think there is anything much in the way of data on this. Certainly not in the U.S. There may be better international data because they're much more ample experience with this.
So, allowing people to vote does not encourage civic engagement?
No, we presume that it would encourage civic engagement. And we know that for some other populations, we simply don't have enough examples in the U.S. of this happening to have data to be able to make the claim successfully.
Is that true for all communities, black and brown, or affluent white communities?
No, we certainly do know historically, for example, that legislation passed that permitted minority communities, such as the Voting Rights Act in its numerous iterations, that permitted minority communities to vote did increase civic engagement. We don't know it. What I was referring to is that we don't know it about this specific issue because there simply aren't enough examples and data.
Understood. On a basic level, would you agree if people can rent or work and pay taxes, should they be able to have the right to vote?
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. And how many people, or if you don't know it, it's, I guess, fine. How many people would gain the right to vote in municipal elections if these voting rights were restored? About?
In the tens of thousands, I believe. I'm not sure what the exact figure is.
The city of Boston has 68,000 people who are not citizens but have legal status.
So tens of thousands sounds about right. Thank you. What percentage of this population is black and brown? Do we know? Councilor, does anyone? I mean, I think it's interesting. You see where I'm going with this, right? The majority of these folks, especially in Boston, immigrants with legal status are Black and brown population. Increasing about 68,000 people to have voting powers is significant in the Black and brown community. Right?
Yes, absolutely. And that's one of the major reasons why we support this initiative.
Thank you. And again, our conversation's probably not, personal for you or for me, but just really obviously for the conversation's sake for our constituents. And so many of these communities are Black and brown communities. Could you speak to how their obtaining the right to vote could increase, I guess, just in terms of, I'll bypass that because we already heard the professor's comments about being technical on statistics. My apologies, we'll bypass that. As we work to restore these rights, or hopefully we do, can you describe the language component? Have we looked into that? Is that an issue at all?
Well, as a matter of state law, there already, and city law, there already are a lot of mechanisms in place to provide language access to, limited English proficient voters. And so that we wouldn't be starting from scratch there.
Great. So that sounds like it's not a big deal. It's not a big issue.
Yeah, as a matter of state and federal law, those who are eligible to vote are entitled in many jurisdictions to language access assistance, yes.
I think that there are a lot of steadfast community agencies already doing this work, right? And we can name a few like Cape Verdean Association of Boston, Centro Presente, High Square Task Force, and so many others, Chinese Progressive Associations. And I'm happy to hear that you're in support. I mean, obviously, again, this is not about just you and I here in this conversation, but it's my hope that they play a central role in the process. And just really grateful that you're here and you're having this conversation with us. Thank you to the lead sponsor on this hearing. Obviously, I support it, and I share the sentiments of my colleague, Councilor Coletta, that if we could move forward with this, it would be magnificent for our communities, especially Councilor Coletta represents a lot of the Hispanic community or Latinx community in East Boston and other areas in her district. For myself as well, super diverse, Cape Verdeans, Latinos, and I think Haitians, majority are in my district as well. Just looking forward to more conversations and wanted to echo Councilor Coletta's point about moving forward with an ordinance. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Fernandez Anderson. Just checking, Shanique, are you still with us? I know Shanique had a hard stop at noon. Just checking. Okay. Well, Shanique, if you're listening, thank you for being here. And we appreciate your work. Second round of questions, Councilor Lara, if you have any questions.
I think that the question that I had was similar to Councilor Arroyo's, but I think that Attorney Love is right in terms of us having the conversation around the challenges, but it was a question in deciding when my office was working with lawyers for civil rights and deciding how we would move forward, the question of who had standing to sue us did come up. So I can give an answer or share my colleagues in terms of what that looks like, who has standing to basically mount up a legal challenge. But I think that Councilor Arroyo is also right, is that our new Attorney General was the person who held this hearing on the City Council before, and I think we'll have support as a city to really be able to move this forward. I'm just reading my notes, excuse me, just to make sure that I'm not missing anything. Implementation. No, I think the questions that I had were really about looking at other cities and seeing how they've been able to do it, if they've put up. And so I think that, we've been in contact and have sat on a panel with Councilor Tiffany Caban from New York, and we all had this conversation. And so I think that we'll want to talk to more people. Like my office will take time to talk to more of the people in other municipalities to get information around how they implemented it and what kind of challenges, if any, they had. But I think that's all that I have. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any of my colleagues, Councilor Coletta, have any questions? Okay, yeah. Okay, awesome. Well, I had a question for Shanique, who is no longer with us, just to uplift the work that a lot of that organizations have been doing on the ground to really explore and imagine what it looks like for our communities to restore voting rights to our immigrant population. So excited that that work is happening and excited about the possibility here. I want to thank you, Professor, for being with us. I want to thank Jacob Love from Lawyers for Civil Rights for being with us. I also want to shout out to the late Professor Lonnie Guinier of Harvard Law School, who was my professor in the law of democracy, who was a big champion for expanding the franchise and including immigrants in the ability to vote. And I think is why it was especially important, Professor, for you to provide that historical context that we here as a country and as a state have historically provided and extended the franchise to non-citizens, and that the manifestation of it being limited to only citizens is actually a recent manifestation in a historical context. So appreciate you both for being here. Appreciate you, Shanique, for being here. And my colleagues for their questions. We are now going to transition over to public testimony. If there's anyone here for public testimony, either in person or via Zoom. Okay. Thank you for being with us. You can now dismissed. We will just wait to see if there's anyone present to give public testimony.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. Thank you, Attorney Love.
Okay, we have no one signed up here for testimony, and so I want to thank my colleagues for being here. I want to thank the administration, Elijah Miller, Monique Nguyen, and Sabino Piemonte. I want to thank, again, our panel, Professor Kaiser. Did I get that right?
Yes. Kaiser, yeah.
Yep, Attorney Jacob Love and Shanique Spalding from the Mass Voter Table. This hearing on docket number, let me get it right, on docket number 0323 is now adjourned.